photographer. He's also the author of UFO Downunder. We have David Waller. David is an ET and an Ayahuasca, did I pronounce that correctly? Ceremony experiencer. So we've got a very different tilt on the spirit with him. And lastly, but definitely not least, we have Michael Lamb, who is our resident alchemist. So thank you very much for agreeing to come today. Okay. Now, over the past few months since I knew we were going to take a booth here, I've asked our readership to send in questions for each of the panelists that you see here today. And here they are. Are you ready? Okay. Before we kick in, can I just get an understanding from the audience of how many of you believe you have actually had a spiritual or ET contact experience? That's great. That's more than I expected, so that's wonderful. Okay. Everyone ready to go in the audience? Columnists? Let's go. We'll start with Sheryl, I think. You recently were quoted as saying in the Gold Coast Bulletin that over the past 4 years, activity on the Gold Coast area has risen by 50%. Why do you think the Gold Coast has become such a hotspot of UFO activity?
Good question. I think it's because, firstly, we've had support from the media. Anyone who's had a close encounter or some sort of UFO event is very hesitant about coming forward. So there's a non-receptive emotional climate when it's not in our media. But because the media has been very supportive, Gold Coast Sun and Gold Coast Bulletin, I think, over the last 4 years, and one particular journalist has been very interested in the subject. He's rung up often to get reports from the area and done a story on them. And I think what that's done is it's cultivated the right emotional climate for people to feel they can come forward because they're being validated with their experiences. So I think that is a big part of it. And anyone who has some sort of experience, like in Brisbane, the papers don't pick it up as much.
No, not at all, right?
No, and so we don't, at the moment, we're not getting a lot of reports from over Brisbane, although in the past, we certainly have had them, again, when the media has published articles about it, or when there's been things on current affairs programs, and there actually has been a couple of news items on the 6 o'clock news. I think Channel 7 at one stage were trying to forge the name of the UFO TV show, basically, news show. So mainly I think it's to do with the media being very supportive.
Do you think with the resurrection of the X-Files we'll see a lot more?
I'm sure we will. I think a lot of things are coming together, and some of you who actually have cable TV will know there is a plethora of television shows on cable TV, on Foxtel at the moment, Alien Invasion, UFOs Declassified, all those sorts of programs. And I think maybe watching that in our media again is helping people feel a bit more confident about coming forward with their own experiences. Some of those experiences are a little bit out there, and they still don't always tell us the whole story, but they often start off with telling me at least about their close sightings, and when they feel they can trust me, then they'll tell me more.
Next question is for Michael. You pass the mic. Last year you were fortunate enough to visit Catalan country, the land of the Cathars no less. Now when you were there, you had your first serious encounter with a Syrian called Celeste in Bucharest market. Would you mind sharing with us that experience?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. It was in Bucharest, which is a sacred mountain in the south of France. It has a lot to do with the Magdalene energy and as well as the Christus energy as well. There's a lot of high paranormal ET activity as well around that place, and a lot of castles. By the way, there's over 33,000 castles, ruins and cathedrals in France alone. The Cathars, that country alone is called Catalan. It's on the Spanish border near the Pyrenees, and there's a lot of interesting people there. I was fortunate enough to be given as a tour guide to a lady by the name of Valerie, and she showed me a lot of different castles. This particular day, we went to the markets in Bucharest, and she knew a few interesting people, and as you could all imagine, markets and cafes are usually what we call interdimensional truck stops. You get every freaking weirdo you could possibly imagine in those places, and it's awesome. It's really good because you see so many out there people. I was introduced to Celeste, and she's told me that she was from Sirius, and I'm pretty good at resonating and looking into people's eyes and seeing, you know, reading their energy. It's just that she said it with that much conviction. There was just no doubt that she was definitely that kind of person. She had a long, thin, lanky body, and she sort of, her soul, or what her spirit sort of hardly actually sat in her body. But she was very telepathic, and you know when you have a connection with someone, you actually get the images or the pictures in people's minds. She said to me, I was from the Sirius energy, and Sirius has a lot to do with the actual establishment of the planet as well, and anything that's happening in actually the country Syria is actually happening in the star system Sirius. So it looks like there's that kind of activity happening in the star groups at the moment, you know. Yeah, if there's a war on Earth, there's wars in the heavens, as it were, because there's many different types of beings, as it were.
I thought they were more evolved than we are.
Yeah, well, once again, you know, it's even the gods, or as it were, in the ancient legends, still have their emotions. They're a little bit harder to rile up to anger or, you know, jealousy or what, as it were. It's just a lot longer process. But still, you know, you're still locked into an emotional body. When we incarnate in these bodies, it's a physical body, and we have a soul, which is like an astral body, and we have a mental mind. That's for the spirit, which is an eternal being, to actually sort of go through the, you know, the cosmic life experience, as it were. And in this material world, we have what's 3 dimensions, and we're starting to work now into 5th dimensional consciousness, which is where we can actually sort of go beyond the normal hearing spectrum, which we call clairaudience, going beyond the normal hearing is clairaudience, more advanced seeing is clairvoyance, and more advanced knowledge is called clairsophience. And it's just like your cat or your dog, as it were. You know, your dog can hear frequencies that you can't.
Yes.
And same with your cat, can see into realms that you can't. And same with, you know, you might have a pet fish or, you know, goanna or something, whatever.
I think David has one of those.
Yeah, exactly. Certain animals have certain abilities and certain attributes, and we can get into that a little bit more later. But she was a very advanced being.
Nature spirits a little later.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, it was quite intriguing to meet that person indeed.
Thank you very much for that. David, you're next on the line. Now, this one's actually, it's kind of a joint question for 2 of us, but I'm going to let David answer it because I'm mean. In August 2013, David and I were fortunate enough to be volunteers on what we term the Greer-thon. Has everyone heard of Dr. Stephen Greer? Okay. Well, he came over in August 2013 and he did a workshop and he launched his movie Sirius at Bond University. And in the evenings, we went to Springbrook Mountain with the Smurf crew. Does everyone know about Smurf? That's short for Springbrook Mountain Emergency Response Force. Okay, so they're great guys, very funny guys too. And they allowed us to do a mass C5 on top of the mountain. And that on the second night, and Dave and I were buddies on the night, buddy volunteers, which meant we got to kind of go round the circle and make sure nobody was freaking out, really. Kind of that. Anyway, at one point on the second night, we were both together, and, well, I won't preempt it. David, would you like to share our experience with the audience?
Which one for that night? There's a few that we experienced.
The greys, the groups of greys.
That walked through the group?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were doing the Dr. Greer meditation. It's a deep Vedic meditation, the one that you may have heard of before. It's definitely out there on the internet to download. But we had Dr. Greer go through that, and we all went into a very deep meditation for quite some time. I think it would be up to an hour, over an hour.
He sang a puja to get us into the night, and that
so
lasted at least 20 minutes.
Yeah, the energy was very much set in a very large group too. It was the largest group that I've done a meditation of this sort as well.
I think there was 2 circles and about 100 meditators.
100 meditators. So there's
the energy.
The intention of going, the one intention of actually calling in Star Brothers and Sisters, as I choose to call them, was very much there. And we definitely felt the energy washing through the group as entities came through and actually visited us, visited everyone that was in the group. So it's quite a profound experience. And to see those photos that were taken afterwards by Smurf as well, so the high...
Yes, if you go to smurf.org.au, you will see the most amazing photographs from that night. And I've also got some on the website at the magazine, so please. And in issue 1, which is free to download, is the actual our report on that night with all the photos, so please do that.
Yeah, please go there and see them because it's quite profound. Specifically, a group of photos have actually seen the light materialise within the group and seen quite clearly some Egyptian or spiritual headdresses as people walk through with staffs, and it's one to be seen, to be believed, to be quite honest, but to be there, it was quite a profound night.
Yes, and we were at one point, we were actually freezing our butts off, I think,
I was
together,
very cold, yes.
at the edge of it, and I just casually, you know how you get the feeling that you get kind of drawn to a certain space? I'm just looking into the darkness, and then suddenly a bit of movement's happening. I grabbed the infrared scope, which one of the Smurf guys had given me, and there's probably about 20 little grey men just enjoying this puja being sung, looking up at the stars. And so I think I yelled at you.
Yeah, it's off in the distance,
Yeah.
and the infrared thing got shoved in my hands, and I saw as well, sort of in line with the entities or the ETs, enjoying the presence, and that was just growing before more and more
Amazing
coming
feeling.
as we went along.
And there was a point where you started doing the protocols, which are taught by Dr. Greer, and I'm watching it. And do you know how you have that doubt creep into your mind when you're having a contact experience? You kind of say, I'm not really seeing this. At that point, one of the Greys closest turned around, looked at me, and we had a telepathic exchange. And that's when I kind of went, okay, no more doubts. I'm there, I'm on board. This is it. So.
Definitely profound night, and from that point as well, that was a significant point for myself, because it started a big journey that ended in, or started and has continued in the Amazon for me over the last couple of years. But it started with that particular point.
And it made the magazine. The reason we're here promoting the magazine is because of this night as well. So I went on this path, and you went to the Amazon. I think I got the wrong deal.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, Amazon's pretty tough anyway. Anyone can handle it.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Barry, over to you. Now, you were based in Clarence Valley in Grafton during March 1998, and that was quite a pivotal time for you because there was a number of sightings of UFOs over that region in March, I believe.
Yes, it was. I was living in Grafton at the time, and actually in 1996 when it really first started, if you're familiar with a UFO photograph taken in Lubbock, Texas with the 19 objects in staggered formation, V formation, I saw identical to that flying just over Grafton City, and that alerted me to UFO activity. And I knew that because my first UFO activity happened in 1970, so I've been interested in it for a long time. But during the 90s and followed right through to the 80s, and particularly in 98, there was a UFO flap. There was lots of disc activity, small to quite large disc activity, flying over town, up and down the east coast in multiple groups. Would hold up to the largest group I saw was around 200, I estimate. And that lit the sky up. The energy coming off them was just enormous. It was just, I don't know, it was just an amazing sight that I wasn't able to photograph that, but there was lots of disc activity in V formations flying backwards and forwards up and down the coast over town. And I put stories in the newspaper with my phone number. Anybody seen these things? And I had over 50 phone calls just when I come back from work in the afternoon. I just spent most of the night answering phone calls, and there's lots of people seeing them. It was an amazing period of time. And it turns out it was a worldwide UFO wave of activity during the 90s of UFO discs. And I saw them very, very close. There was a large V formation that flew overhead, only about 40 feet altitude, and the discs were about 4 meters in diameter each. 7 discs in this formation, and the glow from each object it was sort of blended in with the glow of the other one. There was an enormous amount of activity. And I had a video camera in my hand, and I looked at it and I thought to myself, for some strange reason, don't videotape it, just watch it and record every detail you can, and I can describe every detail of it.
time too, Sheryl?
Oh, yes, during the 1990s, my home number was and still is the contact number for the public to report their UFO events. And during the 90s, we had approximately 500 reports per year that we received, and topping out, I think in 96 or 97, I think it was, we had 800 reports in 1 year. So I didn't have a life for a few years there. But there was a lot of activity, a lot of alien abduction reports, a lot of close encounters of all types of descriptions with all types of beings.
Can I just say that Sheryl is amazing. Not only is she president of UFO Research Queensland, but she herself has actually interviewed over 3,500 people or contactees. So I'm just take my hat off to you.
Well, I'd like to just qualify that. Certainly people who've had close encounters and alien contact of some description, but also multiple UFO events in their life. Yeah.
Yes. The next question is actually still for you, so keep hold of the mic. I've interviewed, not as many as you, but over the years, quite a few spiritual, paranormal and ET related people. I've personally come to the conclusion that what we see at a contact moment is based on how we've been raised. So basically, if you're raised in a Catholic environment, you're kind of pre-programmed to see an angel or a messenger from God come down. Whereas if you're more of an agnostic, you might see an ET or a ghost. That's kind of how I've come. But I want to ask Sheryl, because she's about to do some presentations on perception. And so basically, what do you believe? Does perception play such a huge... Is it our perception? Do I create my own reality with what I see in the contact?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
I would say it depends on your type of experience. Like I said before, during the 90s I spoke to a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of people who had alien abduction experiences, and they were often living in fear and traumatized. I know these days we hear a lot more about positive ET contact, but there are still people out there who report their very frightening alien abduction experiences, if you like. So it depends on the type of experience you've had, but it also does depend. How we interpret it is, yes, definitely up to the individual. And some of you may have read a book by Dr. John Mack called Passport to the Cosmos. Has anyone read it?
Yes.
I know you
You
have.
can always count on Rob.
Yes.
Rob has read everything.
Yes. Well, in that book, Dr. Mack, who is is now deceased, unfortunately, but he was Harvard psychiatrist, and he had also interviewed hundreds of people who had close encounters. And in the book is actually comprised of 3 cases. One is Credo Mutwa, who is an African shaman. Another one is a North American, a Native American Indian. Another one is a South American Indian. And it is their different perspectives of their close encounter / alien abduction experiences. So, and they've all interpreted them differently. So again, though, it depends on the types of experiences. For example, Credo Mutwa had a very negative experience where he was treated roughly, badly by the ETs and made to feel like he was no more worth than an ant, whereas other people are treated very differently. So, but what I have found is that people who report close encounters often have turbulent childhoods. So, and then they can also be highly creative people. So they're often artistic, and they seem to go through this huge transformational process where they flourish in spite of their experiences. If they're negative, that is. And if they're positive, well, they flourish from those two.
Thanks for that. Would you mind passing the mic to Michael? Now, in our last issue 8 of the magazine, Michael wrote, but it was more the pictures that were actually in this particular article, on nature spirits and how they are able to actually be telepathically communicate with certain human beings. And I found that kind of contact quite fascinating, but we didn't really get into the nitty-gritty in the article. So could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, thank you. That's an excellent question. elaborating on nature spirits, how they communicate with us, let's say telepathically or empathically, because we use what's called a universal language, which is like is in our dreams. And people write off dreams as this or that, but it's actually the astral plane where your soul resides. It's like an opposite world to this. They exist in like what's called a time space, because we're in a space-time, three-dimensional world, and they're like layers. There could be an ancient civilization that may have been wiped out and it's gone back into sort of a decay over thousands of years, but the actual energy of the spirits of the beings is actually still there. Now, with nature spirits, there's so many different types. Basically, if I break it down into say 4 or 5 different categories: earth, fire, air, water, and like metal etheric beings. They're like a living entity, as it were. And they're like ourselves, but they communicate. For example, nature spirits would come to us in some of the fruits and the vegetables and the flowers that we have. For example, I photographed nature spirits in the flowers. They're actually like a highly evolved being, but they actually bring forth, such an awesome scent and a color to show us that, that there is so much more than this three-dimensional reality, which is where a lot of the dry as dust scientists have gone. They're trying to prove everything is random and it doesn't have any organization. Whereas if you actually look deeper into nature, it is highly evolved, highly advanced, and this is where we're growing to, and we are constantly evolving because we've understood that these beings are intelligent. It happens in the water. I've had phenomenal connection with dolphins when I've been out there surfing. Next 2 days, the downloads are absolutely off the Richter. I'm actually quite blessed because I've been in this work for so long. I can do the downloads, and some of the stuff that they share with us is phenomenal. We as human beings probably move up to about 16,000 cycles per second in our perception. Dolphins move about 180,000 cycles per second as well. Now, with different nature spirits, you see them as rock elementals. They're like giants. You see them in the face. That photographs here. This is just a very, very, very small example. I'm bringing a book out. And it's the same as like awakening your higher senses. And we can do it by opening or activating our chakras, our light body. But also, you don't want to be too open. I have a lot of psychics and channelers, and they come to me and say, how do I shut it down? Because they're too open. They want to be able to close it down as well. Because, if you got all the channels open, you pick up everything. People say, what's everyone thinking? The average person's got about 30 to 70,000 thoughts a day. And anyway, when you start working with these beings, the more you are in nature, the more attuned you hear and flow into the natural cycles of insects and birds and dolphins, and also, the mammals. You get very, very tuned in, like your cat or your dog or a person you live with. You start to sync up with cycles. That's what actually starts to take place. Telepathy is a natural part of our being. It's been sort of dumbed down over the years, and now we're starting to reawaken it. People that are shamanic or that live in communities and tribe, they get very, very advanced with this. Telepathy works more with the airwaves, or like where thought air works from, like waves, like carrier waves, like radio, X-rays, microwaves, those kinds of things. They're just outside the normal visible light spectrum. But when you start to advance into like a more clairvoyant or clear seeing, you start to see into X-ray.